Dr. Crystallee Crain, professor, artist, writer, poet, um, lover of life and people. One of the first things that I ever wrote that I was really proud of was a play um, called The Freddie and All of Us. And it was around the time when I came out, and it was regarding Freddie Mercury and Queen, and I was probably 12, 12, 13 when I came out. And so it was that resonance of finding likeness in places that weren't necessarily um, in my house or access to those kind of people in my community that were out and, express this kind of freedom and like access to choice. And that really was exciting to me, even as a kid. Choice and discretion and this idea of freedom is not just like an end point, but a way of being. Yeah, I just shared it with my family, and I actually found it a couple of years ago in the pandemic when I was kind of going through like old stuff. Um, and my mom thought it was great, and it was a part of like how I think I came out to my family, at least my immediate family. But I just remember as a kid, like we would do skits for my mom and like do little, mini plays and stuff. And this was like it was like a monologue, but then different parts of Queen songs that were like included in. And so I, as I'm, gonna turn 40 this year, I think about the evolution of me, which, it always has come back to creation in some way, some form. I did not have like art classes. I grew up in Flint Public Schools, Flint, Michigan. Low resources. We did have art classes, right? It was like, okay, pick up these magazines and make a collage. There wasn't that, but what I had was really good, like English language arts teachers. So writing, poetry, that is what was cultivated in me. Um, and in the academic system, that's more rewarded than some visual arts. And of course, I've gone in that direction as well. But I would say outside, there was no formal training. It was, I used writing as as my way to make sense of the world and kind of draw from my own experiences. But I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was doing until much later. I was like, oh, like I have 5 books of poetry that are just sitting there because it's not necessarily for everyone. It's the actual process was a healing process for me. So it's like I didn't even identify until artist for a while because I didn't realize that wasn't the world that I grew up in where they're like, okay, you do this, you're an artist. And I was like, well, I'm just doing it. Right. And I think a lot of people get there where they're just like, oh, am I an artist? Like, we don't have to ask ourselves that really. Of course we are. So one of my mentors is Ayodele Nzinga. She's the first Oakland Poet Laureate. And I would say she's been one of the mentors in my adult life, just around how do you make your art and your activism connect. And so being able to watch her over the years and seeing the way that artivism is also a big part of what I've been up to and just didn't know it. I didn't have the language for it, which I think is a thing for folks. I've always been, like I said before, like a lover of people. And I think a part of that is like I want to understand people's why. And you get that from what they create. And that's a part of how I teach is like I'm trying to pull out the good stuff to see what we can do with it. Because that's how we get to the next best place. And when I've traveled the world and I went to like the London Jazz Festival because I just wanted to hear really good music. I've been to the Salvador Dali museums. I've seen the Vatican. I've seen these things that you're like, that are part of history, that are part of our making. And when we think about art, like art is history creation. We are creating a record of how we live and how we choose to be in these spaces. And I think sometimes we forget that, like we are history makers as we create. I would say it's like 4 years ago, I had this like burst of creative energy after some traumatic things happened, and like all of these beautiful things came out of me, and I fell in love with pastels. I fell in love with watercolor, things that like I didn't jive with before, but it's just a different part of me was coming out. A different story needed to be told. And it's the first time I ever did a self-portrait. That's a mixed medium. There's paint, I think my hair is made out of wire, and there's crayons in there, like, you know, pieces of earth I put on, like it's a whole different kind of thing. And so when we talk about that collective memory, I like that. You know, the history making that we're doing, you know, is also what we need to do to revalidate and reclaim space, to decolonize the ways in which we are even living, like in all of the ways. Is when we reclaim our feelings, when we reclaim our hearts, then we're winning. To me, I mean, like most of us are told, you don't go to college to be an artist. And so I started as a journalism major because I'm a writer, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I wanted to be a muckraking journalist and catch the politicians in the closets, you know, like I wanted to do that. And in some ways I still do. I like the rabble rousing. That's always going to be in me. And I think, you know, one thing I did enjoy in college was I was able to learn about all of the digital media and arts. And so, as you know, like I have a podcast, I could do audio and video editing. All these things were like, it was a class or a training, but I didn't necessarily have to get a degree in it. I wanted my degrees to be about the research and the content and just the ways and new ideas on how to learn. And then I just took off in how I wanted to use it. I didn't really follow the rules of what I was supposed to do, because that's not necessarily what's needed. That, you know, what we need is more creativity. What we need is, you know, innovation. And that's where I thrive. I mean, a big piece of it was, you know, I was using art to educate people, because a big piece of my experience is, you know, making things known that are invisible to oftentimes privileged communities, but sometimes my students, my colleagues, where I'm like, look, if you want to understand something, I have to show you. And so piece of that showing has been a lot of my work, especially like 15 years ago. Jeez, I'm getting old. Was focused on, you know, exposing police terrorism in communities. And so I would work with families, do interviews with families, whether it was, you know, the men who are released and exonerated from Central Park 5 to, you know, the family of Oscar Grant to the family of Marley Graham. These are families that have been impacted for years, but, you know, across the country, and being able to take these snippets of conversations and these videos and showing the protest and bringing them then into formal spaces to kind of break that divide is something that I think the art that I've created does, is, you know, letting folks see what they're seeing on the news is like, these are actual people. This is a whole family. This is a whole community. It's not just a buzzword or something to reshare on social media. These are people. And I think art allows, you know, all of us to be more human. I'm a writer, probably first and foremost. It's how I communicate best. And been working on this book for a number of years now. And my issue is process, because it's a book of short stories and essays about my life and poetry. And, you know, one of my writing coaches says, write like everyone's dead. I'm like, well, I did. But I'll still alive. So I'm like waiting. It's been down for like 7 years, but more life keeps happening, right? So now it's like this, you know, monstrosity of a volume of a thing. And it's just like, okay, because it's not just about me anymore. It's that responsibility of it too. I'm like, all right, what I'm saying is true and it's right. And I needed to get that out. But what is the impact of what I'm creating? What needs to be said and how? And that whole analysis, right? Because like, you write a book about your life, you're not just writing your own story. Because we know how we feel, and we make assumptions about how other people feel. And so as we create, some of those assumptions go away because again, it's that idea of like your audience. You change along the way as you learn and figure out, oh, well, these people think that, but they're not actually like this. They're like this, right? Like, and what's really going to get them is this message rather than this thing I've been doing over here for 5 years and no one's looking at it. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like the learning process of it. But I think too, the idea of just creating to create for yourself is also wholly important. Not everything is to be produced. And I think we're in such a transactional and production oriented culture that if you do something, then you have to make it, something that is shareable. And I don't think that everything needs to be shared. Maybe, we all just need to have our own thing that's just for us that we can covet and keep safe. Right. And then this other stuff can be shared. But that's also our own individual discretion. And I think that's something that over time changes for folks. There's things that I do now that I wouldn't have been comfortable doing 10 years ago because of where I was in my healing process. I'm a different woman now, right? It's a hard place to live for somebody like me, but I was like, dang, like this is not a safe place. Like, it's just not safe. Like, it's not for people of color, not for anybody really, but I'm like, there's something wrong. There's something wrong in the soil. I could feel it like energy wise. I'm like, there's something wrong here. And I really feel like downtown in the square, like there was massacres, something like people have died. Like it's not like it's a spiritually unstable place. Like it's so, and sometimes, I was like, people don't notice this. Like, it's like, I'm like, am I the only one? I'm like, this place ain't right. Like there's something going on that needs some deep healing work, like and it can only be done in community. But like, if there's all this disjointedness, like I was like, it's too much, for my wee bear heart. It's so potent. It's like, the air is so thick. Like, I'm like, it's there. Like, and there's different places in the world like that I've been, and it's like, that's where I think the importance of or creation needs to happen the most. Like, it's like we need all hands on deck, but in order to do that, we have to protect each other. And that's what Dave Prescott is not good at. And so, like, I'm like, look, I'm not going to be in a place that people might try to kill me if you ain't going to show up for me. Like, like, I'm like, okay, deuces. Like, like I'm trying to live. I don't know about y'all, but like, look, if, if the college wants the things that it wants, it has to do better at protecting people. That's why they can't keep no one. Their sanity, their safety for an idea that is not backed up with any action. Not me. um, but I'm so glad I was around for a little while to meet you all because, I made some good connections with you all. And I feel like that was worth it at the very least. I think one of the hardest things and something that breaks my heart often is just how sick the collective we, like the American society is. And it's very scary. Just thinking about my own educational experiences, the high school that I went to is condemned now, that building's empty. And, because of population decrease in the city of Flint. So like they had to close schools. Forget about cutting arts programs, just close the whole school, right? There's, when we think about like the impact on a community when you're not taught or you're not able to learn how to create. Think about what kind of person then we are making. What kind of communities are we making? People who don't know how to create. The people that don't know how to feel and heal. Because everything then just becomes this concrete thing, pen, paper. Like, no, it's so much more. And we won't be able to heal our communities unless we allow people the space and remind each other that we have the space to create. It's not something like you don't need an art class. You don't need, granted we do in systems, but for example, for me, like I've been out of school so long, but like I still like I'll go to my sip and paints. I'll go to like the Flint Institute of Arts down the street has like this glass blowing thing. I'm gonna have glass blowing classes over the summer. I'm super excited. I just want to learn something. I don't know what I'm gonna make, but like just because I want to see, I want to learn about the chemical reaction. Like and like I get excited about learning the stuff. I'm lucky to have that, curiosity, constant curiosity. Because once we lose that as a society and as a culture, right, we're going to lose our ability to be in community engaged with one another. Our differences are going to continue to be the main topic rather than all of our similarities. And the divisiveness will persist. Yeah, I think it's that constant invitation to create that needs to happen. And, people talk a lot about cross curriculum, how to include arts and social justice in all courses, regardless. Like, one, it takes will from the faculty, of course, and the will is lacking. So it's just easier for people to do what they've already done if there's no actual incentive or training on how to embed these ideas or practices into their work. Like, I think that's a barrier. We're not going to have art classes. How do we embed art into all curriculum? How do we embed the idea of creation in all the things that we learn and do?